All right, so my name is Mark Spears. We're talking about terraforming your way to better security today. And can I hit this? Will that work? Yes. All right. So I'm a principal security consultant over at Solis Security, which is also known as CFC Response. We do a lot of security incidents from an assurance perspective. So we see the worst of the worst all day, and we meet all the people who are insured on the worst day of their life, right? They normally either just got a BEC and someone sent out a ton of money, hopefully not that much of a ton, or they've been ransomware and the guys came in and just literally just fully ransomware the environment, and the threat actor is just asking for money, or there's a live threat actor, or sometimes multiples in the environment. So we have kind of a wide range of jobs to do. Like on a business email compromise, it's kind of cut and dry, right? Money's already gone. They're not trying to get further in your environment. But on ransomware cases, we see a lot of, we have multiple teams that kind of handle the event, including a cyber incident manager who's really good at what they do. We have a business resumption manager, Alex, who's probably watching this presentation right now. And his whole job is to get the threat actor out of the environment and get them back to business. Not many insurance companies have, or at least didn't have, that type of a department to do this stuff with. And then we have a whole forensic teams that just literally go through mountains of data looking for what happened. So I've been there for 10 years now at Solis Security, CFC Response. I played virtual CISO, I've played CISO. I do a lot of like chief zero trust security officer type things, live response, the whole 9 yards. I'm not the guy they call in for normal ransomware. I'm the one they call in for the web application stuff, DDoS. People forget that your firewall is a website, especially when you open up the user admin login or the SSL VPN. Those are both definitely websites. So I do a lot, especially with OWASP chapter. I talk usually twice a year. So some of my hobbies, actually, you see like the H2 on the top of the screen for hardware hacking. One of my most favorite things to do. So today is going to be kind of simple. We're going to talk about terraforming concepts, go over some samples, and then look at some samples. So kind of keeping it really simple today. Who here has done terraforming before with your DevOps work? Okay. Are we doing it mainly for infrastructure, or are we building in security providers as well, like your Auth Zeros, your Cloudflares, your Zscalers? Good. So that you probably don't need to be here then today. So, but terraforming, I had a project just come up where we needed to build and destroy an environment every week that needed to get refreshed, right? It needed to be the same thing every time, every week with an immediate refresh. So I started out just playing with terraforming in Linode, and that was simple enough. Like if any of you, this whole infrastructure as code thing, have built things and learned the languages from JavaScript, VB.NET, any flavor of the JavaScripts that are out there nowadays, like that's hard. Terraforming was extremely easy, and it was actually a lot of fun. And then I took it past the Linode and I started terraforming Cloudflare Zero Trust into there as well. So there's security pieces you can build the entire way. So let me go over just a little bit about terraforming. So this first look over here is we have one file, and you can put everything into one file. If you're just going to terraform a little bit, it's really simple and neat. But in the Terraform, there's a few things you have to have, and we'll demo these, like which providers you're going to use off of what's called the registry, unless you've built your own Terraform providers, which I haven't done. Then you've got to have the provider's API tokens and however you're going to interact with those providers. You can have variables And then all your infrastructure as code to create and modify configurations. There's a few commands that you have to kind of know. And those commands, it's going to work. Yeah, it does. So those commands, basically, when you create a Terraform, you have to initialize the code. Well, let me back up 1 second to the how to install on your computer. Really simple, really simple. On a Mac, I just use Brew, simple enough. And then I use VS Code, and I added 2 extensions, one for HashiCorp and one for this gentleman from Anton Kulikov. And it was mainly for helping with IntelliSense, and structures. So 2 simple extensions right on VS Code, super simple. The commands, when you write your first Terraform file, you might have just almost nothing in there. But once you put your providers in there, you'll run what's called Terraform init. And that's just going to initialize the environment, look at what providers you've selected, and then it's going to download off of the Terraform backend how Terraform interacts with those providers. So in the end, when you look at Terraform, it really is an infrastructure JSON piece of code that is just going to do API calls. It's kind of just an easy way to do those. And then when you have your Terraform file, you'll call Terraform validate at will. Like, did I write something wrong? You save your current Terraform file. It'll tell you, hey, you forgot this, you needed to have this. And those Visual Studio extensions actually help with that. And then you have this one called Terraform plan, where it'll actually give you a CLI readout of what it plans on doing. Is it creating objects? Is it destroying objects? And it tells you what its plan was. And it's kind of really interesting and neat to watch. And then when you're ready to Terraform, you run Terraform apply, and that's going to create this state file. And this state file would be kind of like if you wrote an app and you wanted to kill something later, you'd have to store the object IDs and all the things that you created so you could run the API call to kill it. And that state file is going to keep all those IDs in there. So because Terraform knows how to create it, it's going to save everything it created in that state file. And then when you run a Terraform destroy, it'll actually use that backend state file to get rid of it. Like, it's gone. Now, I've heard of horror stories. Who's had a Terraform horror story? Almost like the Wii, like with the Wii bowling? No? Yeah. So you could really mess things up bad, right? But start small and play around. It really is to me a good technology because it fits well into a CI/CD and everything else. So, any questions on this slide here? I know it's kind of a broad stroke overview, nothing too terribly hard to look at. So, see if I can tell my computer to switch, and it is not. All right, so a couple concepts to go over. We talked about the Terraform registry. It's just registry.terraform.io. If you want to know who's out there that you could use in terraforming, just go there and you can look them up. My samples I made today involve Linode and Cloudflare. The production thing for work I did is working in both of those environments. The demo I prepared today, the Linode's working, but the Cloudflare piece is not. So, but there's a lot of other things in there. There's AWS, GCP. For security and authentication, you got Cloudflare, Zscaler, Auth0. You could even like Terraform your keys you use to create these environments if you want to get really, really strong about it. So I was shocked CrowdStrike had one. I was hoping SentinelOne did. Not that we're talking oil of endpoint detection, but I thought it was cool that they had one. So let's just go look at some of the things, at the top in the gray area, you can see here, we're going to look at these providers in Terraform and what they have for their documentation and other places you can look for help. So if we go to the Terraform registry, you can actually just do a search or browse through here. So you can see there's a lot of providers that are in here, including Azure. One of the things I just did used Azure to go grab users in a specific user group and then terraformed based on those individual users, kind of making Active Directory very helpful again, right? So let's go look at the Linode one real quick, because we're going to see a lot of examples on that here. I just searched for Linode. There they are. You could see that, let's carry this around. You could see that, it was updated last 20 days ago. You can see that there's a little thing that says how to use this provider. You click on that, it's just going to drop down a little bit of text here. Oh my God, overlapping things. So you can see where it tells you, hey, in the Terraform file, you would say require providers Linode, and there's the code you just copy and paste. Then a little further, it asks you like the configuration options. Linode just has an API token you'd have to generate from the Linode, and that's how it's going to interact with the API through Terraform. So even cooler is the documentation. Anyone else here use Linode at all? They're just a good, inexpensive provider. Akamai bought them and didn't destroy them like we've seen other people do. I want to mention Cisco, but I just did. So, but Akamai, I just talked to Linode the other week, like they've left them almost completely alone just to do their own thing. And it's been a good experience with them. They really haven't changed too much except for adding better features. So they were actually one of the first like cloudy providers out there. Like they went through like the days of data center to cloud. If you guys remember those days, but they were kind of fun, back when the cloud was just yet another data center. So you can look over here and, it gives you some sample code. And then if I go to resources, like there's a bunch of resources you can get in any provider, whether it's Azure, Linode, GCP. So when we talk about Linodes, like I can go over here and I can create a firewall. And this would be the code I would use to create the firewall as infrastructure as code. Not all those attributes are necessarily required, but it's just showing you an example of what you could do. So, and then if you go down even further, it's going to give you argument references. Like, what does this mean? What does this do? And that's really cool. And then if I go over here, I want to look at the Linode instance or a VM, right? Like are some example usages on how to create a Linode instance that you want to call web. And in there, you would put, when you create the instance, your authorized keys, your root passwords, you can tell it disk swap size. You can get very nitty gritty with all of these. So it tends to be just a lot of fun. So there's some samples here actually defining interfaces and tags and all sorts of fun stuff. The other piece that you can do in here, besides looking at all these other things you could build, is these data sources. So I'm going to pull a sample of this up as well. But these data sources, I can pull up, and this is like truly making an API call. Like I can come over here and say, hey, give me a list of all of my firewalls, right? Or I can get information on one firewall. So you could have that JSON look of creating something, but sometimes you need other things or other data to iterate through to create things from. So that's where this data would come from. This would give me generically right here, a list of all the firewalls in the account, and it would output that to my display so I could then, while I'm coding, see what the data is like on the other side. Really easy, super, super easy. And then of course, here's all the argument references that you could use. So in the sample that I'm going to show in a minute here, like I just want to grab all the Linode images so I can see which ones we had, to select from. Because I just do that while I'm coding, and then I can start filling in the blanks. So really kind of easy. In the terms of what's not going to work in my presentation today, would be the Cloudflare provider. And I think they just updated theirs 13 days ago. And you click on use provider and you can see like how to set them up. And you can have multiple providers. Like one of my latest work things included Azure, Cloudflare, and Linode, right? So all of them, they could all interact with each other. And if I go to the documentation, you can do a lot of fun things. Like they've got a lot, like there's a lot of zero trust stuff in here. There's account level things. There's API Shield, which is one of the more expensive products on the WAF side. There's Cloudflare One, which is their zero trust. There's custom pages. It ties into their developer tools, their zero trust tools, their WAF tools, and everything, even their network tools. So you can create DNS records, and if you had an environment that you wanted to spin up, you can create the DNS records for it, and the whole 9 yards, right? Including all the WAF rules you want to have as a default. So a lot of fun things in here. And at the bottom here, same thing. You have a whole section on data sources where you're not creating or modifying, you're actually just going to bring some data back. Whether it's on the account members, the whole 9 yards. So a lot of fun. Back to the presentation. There we go. All right. So, go back one. All right. So let's go look at a sample of these. I'm going to pull up just a very simple Visual Studio code file. So this is one of 3 samples. So one thing when you first create your Terraform file, this is putting everything in one file right now. And if you see any keys, I'll be deleting them as soon as this is over. And the keys had limited access. So nanner, boo boo. So you can see like for that code earlier, like the required providers, this one, I just copy and pasted that Linode provider from the Terraform registry. So it's telling Terraform, hey, I need you to download the Linode provider. And then let me bring this down just a little bit more. Oh, no. All right, so there's my Linode token. All it can do is create a VM, so have at it if you want to. Yeah. Like I said, they're pretty inexpensive. So so there's a provider key we talked about. And then I just said, hey, let's create a firewall, right? That allows no public access. That's all the code you have to have. A label, an inbound policy of drop, and then an outbound policy of accept. That way we have just a true basic firewall. We could create other rules in there to allow your home IP or something while you're developing, right? And that's a lot of fun. And then we could get this next piece here, past the code, is getting a list of all the images available. It's a sample of using that data source that we looked at earlier. I told you I'd have. So it simply just says data, line on image, all images is what I called it. And then the output is just the data, images, all images, everything with an ID. And there are samples all over the web here. Like this is not rocket science. I said that probably 7 times now. It's just, again, easy. So see task 3, expand using variables. I'll get to that in a second. So this is going to create 2 Linodes. One I'm calling Cali1, and there's the label, there's the image, there's the region, the type, there's a tag I can use in Linode. There's a very, very horrible root password. Actually, it's length over complexity. Remember that? So always better, longer length. And then the firewall ID, right, that's going to assign to that. And notice it's using the firewall we put in earlier. It's just calling it, here's the firewall, here's the name, and I want the ID. And that's the ID I'm going to assign to that line node out the get-go. So I'm using in the code things that the code already has. And one thing that Terraform does well is it absolutely figures out what order it should do things in. I haven't had it mess up once yet. I'm sure others of you who maybe have done more have had to kind of hint at what it should do. So defining two interfaces for the public and the private, disk encryption, and then there's the second one that's going to be based on Debian. So that's all we're going to do here. So to make this run, all I'm going to do is type with one hand here. Oh, where is my terminal? Terminal. And so before you hit Linode initialize, there won't be this .terraform here. This gets created at initialization, and when it downloads the registry data for that provider. So if I deleted it, it would just come right back. But it won't be there. And there's a lock file while it's doing things, and there's a state file. So the state file should be rather empty right now. Like you see, it's just got the version and what it's using. So let me just actually go run this real quick. If I can get the Zoom stuff out of my way. Okay, so I'm just going to type in Terraform init, which you only have to call that once. Everything's green, you know you're good. And then I'm going to say Terraform validate. And it says my syntax is good. Then I'll run what's called Terraform plan. And I'll make this a little bigger now. And Terraform plan is going to read that Terraform, and it's going to tell me things, right? So if I go back to where I put Terraform plan in up here in my CLI, there's where I ran plan, right? You can see where it's calling the all images, and it's reading it, and it's done. And then you could see where it says, I'm going to create these things. Here's the Linode firewall. And this is where it gets fun, because when Terraform calls and creates a firewall, it doesn't know the firewall's ID yet, but it will know it in the order it creates it in. And you can call that ID later for other things. So then it's going to create a Debian instance. Again, it doesn't know everything. It says known after apply, and then it'll call the Kali 2. Now, just to show you guys, I'm going to pull up my actual Linode. You can see there are no firewalls in here. You know, Linodes are empty. Stack scripts are empty. Stack scripts are like bootstrapping for like what you want to have it install when you first run it. And then here's the firewalls. So I'll go back to my Visual Studio Code. And now I'm going to run clear. I'll do Terraform apply. Now it reruns the plan one more time, and I could have said -auto-approve, and it would have skipped this idea of needing to say yes. And you'll have to do that for your CI/CD pipelines anyway. So it's creating a firewall on 2 VMs, and quite literally, it'll be done here in about 20 more seconds, probably. Done. And we'll go back and review them on the Linode. If I go to the line node right now, you'll see that Firewall is already there. And you can see that the rules I put into there are there, right? The default accept and drop rules. You can see my VMs are there. Not quite yet. But what you can see is I told those VMs when they create to use that firewall. Oh, there they are. They're just booting up right now. So that's pretty quick, right? For what you're trying to provision. So it makes it very interesting. So if I go back to my firewalls, you'll see that the firewall is applied to those two VMs I just made already. Like, so when they come up, they're already going to have a firewall protecting them. So building security into your infrastructure, and you can get way deep with all these topics. So any questions on that? Kind of simple? It took me like a week to become a Terraform expert. Like, it was really quick. You know, there's things I don't know, obviously, but to be able to play with it, it was like maybe a half a day. You know, so I'm going to go back to, now these are created. So if I go back to my Visual Studio file here, you'll see that on the output, it actually went through as we told it in the data source, gave me a list of all those images. And it just came back with the list of all the images in the output. So I can see that now, right? I don't have to use it in my code, you know, but I have all the images available now. So a lot of interesting things. Now, to get rid of this, all I have to do is the magic of Terraform destroy. Again, I could have said -auto-approve and it would have not asked me to approve it. But you can see, like, it's actually telling me a plan of what it plans on getting rid of right in there. So all of that, and it's even coming back with the IDs. And before I say yes to that, if I show you that Terraform state file, you could see that state file after I applied. It's got those image values in there. It's got the data. Go all the way down. Hold on. Too much data on the images. So you see over here where it talks about the line node firewall, and it's grabbing all these ID things that you normally get from an API, but they're just going to sit in here, right? So you could output those to other pieces of code into your CI/CD. Super simple. And then there's the other line node instance that's going to destroy. So any of those things in there could be output variables or other things you might want them to be. So there's the Kali instance. That should be near the end of the file. So, all right. So I'm going to go back to my Terraform destroy, and I'm going to tell it to run. If I can get my cursor to work. Okay. So I'm going to say yes to the destroy that we had sitting there. And this is how quickly it just goes away. Especially on the web when you're playing with things like, I could go to your Terraform, some things with like a $5 shared line node, right? Or a bunch of them. And you're only paying fractally for the minute or for the hour. And it makes it really nice because you can play with smaller pieces of infrastructure before you actually select the stuff that's going to cost the company money. So it's still destroying, but if I come over here to my line nodes, we should see some things starting to go away. My firewall is still there. I go to my line nodes themselves, and they're already gone. Firewall's gone. And we come back into here, and our state file is pretty much empty now. Again, it keeps a copy of the state. So that's really easy. There's another concept in here I'll go over quickly here, and that is we got the variable images in there. So there's the idea of variables, right? So in here, we can create as many variables as we want. You can make it easy or hard. I suggest going easy as you start. But you basically give it a description. What type is it? There's many types available, like arrays, strings. And then is it sensitive? Because if you put sensitive, it won't output it into the output where people can see it. It just leaves it kind of hidden. And then you could put a default value in there. So if I just uncomment that code, and then this is for the Linode tags. You can see here I've got a tag I hard-coded for OWASP demo. And these tags over here are actually using the variable by use of this $sign with the variable name, var dot the name you gave it right above there. So, of course, I can remove that one. And there we go. And then I do the same thing over here. Comment out this tag. And there we go. So now if I come into here and I say, I gotta save the file. I can go Terraform, validate. And the error messaging on this is actually pretty good, right? So it's telling me that I did something wrong here, right? Line 75. So let's go back into line 75. Oh, I didn't hit my shift button good enough. So there's a sample of me miscoding something for you guys to share later. So really nice and easy, right? And a lot of documentation online, a lot of samples, a lot of YouTube that's out there. So any questions on this first sample at all? Any questions online? Okay, so back in the PowerPoint presentation, so a couple of things to note here, the provider API access. You know, when you create your token keys, make sure you use minimal access. Like on Linode, you didn't really have, you could say what it could do. Could it read or could it read write across several categories? But yet the Cloudflare one enabled us to get granular with what IPs can I access. It was a lot more granular, right? So just keep that in mind when you're selecting things that you want to do or providers you want to use. Like how secure can you make them? How easy is it to roll keys? Do I need to have an API call to roll a key, then roll that into my Terraform? Or can I just keep rolling it if I want to? A lot of things. Also, since we're here at OWASP, the cheat sheet series has a whole thing on infrastructure as code. So that's a good thing for us all to talk about. So there's, I'm sure, other things in the cheat sheet. I use them a lot. Everyone uses cheat sheets at all? Like I'm always in there poking around for some industry, like what's been talked about that we should all be doing, right? So also on those state files and the variables, make sure you plan and document your dev QA in your production. I found it easy to just run dev locally and then, have the state file locally, right? But when you start building into your CI/CD, that state file needs to go somewhere in the cloud. Whether it's like GitHub, Terraform has their own cloud infrastructure to store it in. R2 buckets from Cloudflare you could use, S3 buckets from AWS. Use whatever you want, but you need to be able to protect that state file. Because as I've heard before, if you lose that state file, it's not a lot of fun. So, all right, let's see. So demo one, we already did it. So what do we do in demo one? Within demo one, we did an all-in-one file, right? Like we put everything in one file, and that's the easiest way to start. I'd say that was the easiest way for me to start. And then we created a firewall. We used the data sources to bring back all of our image types. You could use that for whatever you have that's useful for you. We did some variables. We created a VM with security using firewall assignment before it even got created. Using a yet unknown firewall ID, because the state file is going to have that as it terraforms the transformation. Security keys or passwords. We created some VLANs, and we talked about the state file. So everyone here has created like security keys before for tokens, right? So I'll just pull up my Linode real quick. So if I come under my account here and I go to my API tokens, I've got a couple tokens in here, but I can go over here on this OWASP demo. I can view my scopes, right? I can't change them. When you create them in Linode, there's no altering them. But if I went to go create one, you can say when it expires, right? And then you could also say, hey, I want everything to have no access, but I only want to access these things in here. So your key security becomes very important, especially when you talk dev, QA, and production, and where those are stored and how they're securely stored, right? GitHub's got solutions for that. Microsoft's got their secret store. Cloudflare's got their secret store. Azure DevOps, the whole 9 yards. So this is basically what we did. If you want more information, like go to the Terraform registry and go look up things there. And HashiCorp has got a whole bunch of information on their website. I found using everything at once is probably the best solution for me. So other technologies that you guys might be using, like just using straight APIs. I think there's a time and a place for each one of these. Like, do we just use straight up APIs? Or do you want to terraform a whole bunch of stuff, right? Because if you use the APIs, you still got to store all those IDs to get rid of stuff, right? Terraform kind of has an easy solution for that. Microsoft has their Bicep solution, which is very similar to this, but it's if you're going to live only in the Microsoft ecosystem, that's what your CISO, your CISO, we only use Microsoft stuff, right? So until they ask around the company and find out you're in Linode and you're in GCP and you have AWS, and it then becomes some kind of shadow IT that no one, well, some of us like shadow IT. So, all right. Any questions on this one? All right. So sample two, I'll roll through this as quickly as I can. So in sample two, I just wrote my notes in the main file. So this one, we introduced a bit of a difference. Notice in the code files up here, the .terraform is your provider files, right? But notice I have a main.tf for Terraform. I have a providers.tf. I have a terraform.tf vars. And a lot of people use that for QA, dev, and production. They'd have different files, right? And then there's a variables file. So, a lot of times it's a good practice, as I've read a lot on breaking this up. So the provider's Terraform file just literally has the provider you need. And then notice that the token is in a variable format now, right? So to actually create those variables, you would actually create the variables.tf file. And we did this before in the one file methodology, right? But we're just putting them in a separate file, kind of separating our code layers out, even though it's not really code layers. But we have a Linode tag in here, and we have the API token. So, and because we called it Linode-token in our name of the variable, in the provider, we'd use the same thing, var.linode-token. So, which again, in production and regression testing, would probably go to some GitHub secret store or something, right? So we're not giving stuff away. So then to actuate initialize these variables, like again, this is the one I have, but you could have a QA and a production variable file. And I just literally have that token up in there, right? So that's as simple as it gets. So in this one here, you could see that if I get rid of Copilot, so much better. So in this one, I'm actually going to do something a little different. I'm going to be bootstrapping the initial software that's going to be deployed in here. So I'm going to create a resource from the Linode repository called Linode stack script that's already predefined for me. And I'm going to call it TF initialization for X, some environment, right? There's a label, there's a description. In Linode, you have to tell it which images that stack script or that bootstrap script is available for. And then you just put this script into here, right? Like just telling it bin bash, apt update and upgrade, do something else, and end a file. So that's one way to do it, using Linode specifically with their feature set. Microsoft, I'm sure, has the same thing in Bicep or something very similar. One thing I want to point out here, that this sample is mainly all the same, but there are two ways to actuate these bootstrap scripts. One is usually through remote execution, where Linode is actually going to connect to it and give it some things to do as you would do manually through SSH connections. So I have a sample of that here. It's just commented out. But in your Linode, you would basically say that you're trying to say, hey, here's how you connect to me, right? For SSH, here's my user, here's my password. Notice I'm just calling self to get the password I put in. And the host is basically myself as well on this one. And then then you call provisioner. Remote execute this code in line, and you give it the code that you want to execute, right? You could, in my work sample, I can't show, I terraformed a whole like VNC environment by, to the operating system with system control commands and enabling, all the things you need to do that you could do in a bash file, you can push this direction as well. And it makes it really nice and have it reboot at the end. So that's one way of doing it, right? But it's not as, I don't think it's as sexy, and it's not, I think it's prone to error. I didn't have any errors, but I think it could be prone to error because you're relying on Terraform to do that work. But if you just use Linode's built-in stack script availability to say, hey, like when you create this VM, start this stack script ID, it makes it really nice. So I'm going to go ahead and enable this and create these two resources. And I think we'll cut it off, Tiana, for questions after this. So I'm just going to run my Terraform in it, make sure it's good. Got green. Terraform. Make sure I save this. Terraform.validate. Success. And then I did delete my last Terraform, right? My Linode, it's gone. line nodes, yeah, they're all gone. All right, so back to my Terraform. So Terraform dot apply, auto approve. And it's off to the races. Very interactive on the shell script, though. They did a good job. I know terraforming is not new. I know a lot of us like to play with new fun technologies that are cool, that aren't always going to be around in 5 years, and it costs the company 3 times as much for maintenance. And we try to stay away from that stuff. So, and when I go back to my Terraform over here, you'll see the line nodes are just now booting up, right? And you could see that I have a stack script that it created over here, and which is my bootstrap script. So if I click on that, I can go edit my stack script. Back one. So you see at the bottom here, that the actual script that's in there. And what Lino does specifically, it'll actually create it in the root directory, and you can actually see, and I've actually got stack scripts. I say, hey, like output the standard out and standard error to a different file, so I can kind of follow what happened in case there was an error. There's just a lot of things you could do in here, but you see it did deploy. My line nodes are there and they're running, and they ran the apt update, and they're probably still running it right now because it's going to take it probably 5 minutes or 3 minutes, whatever it is, before it finishes running. So that's about as far as we're going to get today, because we're 4 minutes out. I appreciate everyone listening, and any questions?
Yes, any questions that anybody has?
Yeah, what's HashiCorp's role to Terraform? Like, what's its purpose?
You know, I didn't research that part there, my friend. I think it's their framework though. I think IBM bought HashiCorp, if I was reading properly. So there's like a free version. Thank you for nodding your head. There's a free version, and I'm sure IBM's got their paid for version if you want that. So, but it was initially, I think all of it was free at the beginning. So it's all still free. I did nothing paid for.
Anybody else? Okay, well, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.